Have you ever seen someone make a mistake so big it didn't just cost them their job, but it sent shockwaves through an entire industry? This isn't a story about a simple customer service dispute. It's about a routine boarding pass scan at the world's busiest airport and a single catastrophic decision made by a gate agent who thought she held all the power. She chose to humiliate a quiet, unassuming black man over the validity of his ID. What she didn't know was that she wasn't just delaying a passenger. She was poking a sleeping giant and about to unleash a storm of consequences that would involve police escorts, frantic CEO calls, and a revelation of unimaginable power that would make headlines worldwide. Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport, the undisputed king of air travel, hummed with its usual chaotic symphony on a Tuesday morning. It was a city unto itself, a river of humanity flowing through concrete and glass canyons. At Gate C-33, the destination was San Francisco, a route favored by the tech-savvy and business-minded. The airline was Ascend Air, a carrier that prided itself on a sleek, modern image and premium service, a reputation it sold for a premium price. In the priority boarding line for Ascend Air Flight 815 stood Damian Cole. To the casual observer, he was impeccably, but not ostentatiously dressed, a charcoal grey unstructured blazer over a simple black t-shirt, tailored trousers, and minimalist leather sneakers that likely cost more than the average person's entire outfit. He was in his late 30s with a calm, observant demeanor. He wasn't scrolling on his phone or making loud business calls. He was simply present, his gaze occasionally sweeping over the frenetic energy of the terminal, his expression unreadable. He held a simple leather portfolio and his passport ready for the gate agent. The gate agent in charge was Celine Miller. Celine had been with Ascend Air for 12 years. 12 years of dealing with entitled passengers, screaming children, and the relentless pressure of on-time departures. The fresh-faced optimism she once had was long gone, replaced by a hardened cynicism and a rigid adherence to the rulebook. The rulebook was her shield and her sword. Today was particularly trying. A system glitch had caused a backlog, and her manager Andrew Finch had already barked at her twice about boarding times. She was looking at every passenger, not as a person, but as a potential problem. When Damian Cole reached her podium, he offered a polite, closed-mouth smile. "Good morning," he said, his voice a low, steady baritone. He handed her his passport and first-class boarding pass. Celine took them without making eye contact, her fingers flying across her keyboard. She scanned the boarding pass. Beep. She then opened the passport. It was a new US passport, the next generation model, with its polycarbonate data page and updated security features. Celine's eyes narrowed slightly. She held it up to the light, then angled it, looking for the holographic elements. She ran her thumb over the laser-engraved photo, a motion she'd done thousands of times. But this time she paused. "I haven't seen one of these before," she said, her tone flat, accusatory. "They began issuing them a couple of years ago," Damian replied calmly. "It's the new standard. It feels off," she said, rubbing the polycarbonate page again. She typed something into her computer. Her lips pursed. "The system is having trouble verifying this passport number." Damian's placid expression didn't change, but a flicker of weariness passed through his eyes. He'd encountered this before. "That's likely an issue with your system's database not being fully updated," he suggested gently. "The passport is perfectly valid. It was issued by the State Department 8 months ago." Celine looked up at him for the first time, her gaze dismissive. It swept over his simple attire, his calm face, and settled on a conclusion she had already reached. In her mind, the expensive but understated clothes, the first-class ticket, and this unfamiliar off passport didn't add up for the man standing in front of her. It was a quiet, insidious calculation, a product of years of unchecked biases. "Sir, I'm going to need to see another form of identification," she declared, her voice now carrying a sharp edge of authority. Damian blinked slowly. "Certainly." He reached into his blazer's inner pocket and produced a wallet. From it, he extracted a driver's license, a Georgia Real ID also, with enhanced security features. He placed it on the counter. Selena picked it up with 2 fingers, as if it were contaminated. She compared the photo on the license to the one in the passport, then stared at Damian's face. They were, of course, perfect matches. "This doesn't help," she snapped, her frustration mounting. "These can be faked too. High-quality forgeries are common." A few people in the line behind Damian began to mutter, shifting their weight impatiently. The murmur was a mix of annoyance at the delay and curiosity about the unfolding drama. "Ma'am," Damian said, his voice still low, but now laced with a steely firmness. "I assure you both of those documents are federally issued and 100% legitimate. You can run them through any official system you have. I am who I say I am." Celine saw this not as an explanation, but as a challenge to her authority. The stress of the day, the pressure from her manager, and her own ingrained prejudices coalesced into a wall of obstinance. "Sir, you're holding up the boarding process," she said, her voice rising. "I am not comfortable validating these documents. Until I am, you will not be boarding this flight." She slid his passport and license back across the counter, a gesture of finality. She then pressed a button on her intercom. "Andrew, I need you at gate C33. I have a passenger with questionable identification." Damian Cole stood his ground, his portfolio held loosely in one hand. He hadn't raised his voice. He hadn't made a threat. But as he looked at Selena Miller, a profound and quiet disappointment settled in his eyes. He knew this was no longer about a simple document check. It had become about something much uglier. The storm had arrived, and Selena Miller had just willingly stepped into its path. The name Andrew, spoken into the intercom, summoned a man who embodied middle management mediocrity. Andrew Finch scurried into view from the jet bridge entrance, a man in his late 40s with a slightly too tight company blazer and a perpetual sheen of sweat on his forehead. He saw the stalled line, Selene's rigid posture, and Damian's calm presence, and immediately went into corporate defense mode. His job wasn't to solve problems, but to contain them and absolve the airline of any liability. "Selene, what's the situation?" he asked, ignoring Damian completely, at first addressing only his subordinate. "Manager, I have a passenger, a Mr." She glanced at the ID with disdain. "Damian Cole. He's presented a passport and a driver's license that I am unable to validate. The passport feels flimsy, and our system isn't recognizing the number sequence properly. I believe they may be forgeries." Andrew Finch picked up the passport, giving it a cursory, self-important inspection. He held it, angled it, and then passed it back to Celine, as if confirming her expertise. He finally turned his attention to Damian, his expression a practiced mask of professional concern that did little to hide his condescension. "Mr. Cole," he began, his voice smooth and insincere, "we take national security and the safety of our passengers very seriously here at Ascend Air. I'm sure you can understand. My gate supervisor is one of our most experienced, and if she has a concern, I have to trust her judgment." Damian met his gaze, his own unwavering. "And I take my appointments in San Francisco very seriously," he replied, his tone even. "Your employee's judgment is based on her unfamiliarity with current-generation federal documents. Your system's failure to recognize a valid passport number is a deficiency in your technology, not in my identification." He was articulate, precise, and betrayed no anger. This seemed to irritate Andrew even more. He preferred shouting threats, something he could label as unruly behavior. Calm logic was harder to dismiss. "Be that as it may," Andrew said with a dismissive wave of his hand, "airline policy gives us the right to refuse boarding to any passenger if we cannot confidently verify their identity. It's right there in the contract of carriage you agreed to when you purchased your ticket. We are well within our rights." This was the corporate trump card, the shield of fine print. He wasn't arguing the facts. He was hiding behind the policy. "Are you refusing to run the documents through a secondary verification system? Perhaps one linked directly to a federal database?" Damian asked. "Or are you simply choosing to stand by a gut feeling?" The question hung in the air, a direct challenge to their professionalism. The other passengers in line were now fully invested. A young woman a few feet back, a student named Sarah, had surreptitiously angled her phone, the red dot of its recording app glowing discreetly. Andrew's face tightened. "Sir, we don't have that kind of system here at the gate. We have our system, and it's telling us there's an issue." He gestured vaguely at the computer terminal. "I'm not going to have my employee override security protocols based on your assurances." "So to be clear," Damian said, his voice dropping slightly, becoming more focused, "Ascend Air's official position is that a 12-year veteran employee and a gate manager are incapable of distinguishing between a real and a forged United States passport, and your solution is not to escalate verification, but to deny boarding to a ticketed first-class passenger." He wasn't just a passenger anymore. He was a litigator building a case. The precision of his language was making Andrew Finch deeply uncomfortable. "We can book you on a later flight," Andrew offered, trying to pivot to a customer service solution. "Perhaps after you've had a chance to visit a TSA agent at the main security checkpoint to have them look at your documents for you." He was trying to make it Damian's problem to solve, not the airline's. "No," Damian said simply. The word was not loud, but it was absolute. "I will be taking Flight 815, for which I have a valid ticket, and of which you are currently in breach of contract by denying me passage without just cause. The cause you've provided your employees feeling is not sufficient." Celine, who had been watching her manager handle it, felt a surge of righteous indignation. "So we are trying to help you. There's no need to be difficult. We are responsible for every soul on that plane." The hypocrisy was breathtaking. She was casting herself as the guardian of safety, while her actions were rooted in baseless suspicion. "Your help," Damian counted his eyes locking onto hers, "feels remarkably like prejudice. You made a judgment the moment I handed you my passport, and you and your manager are now reverse engineering a justification for it." The word prejudice changed the atmosphere. It was no longer an argument about plastic cards. It was about something raw and real. Andrew Finch's face paled slightly. That was a word that led to lawsuits, to viral videos, to corporate-mandated sensitivity training. "Now hold on," Andrew said, raising his hands defensively. "Nobody said anything of the sort. This is purely a security matter." But the denial was weak, and everyone listening knew it. Damian saw the deadlock. They were too committed to their course of action to back down now, without admitting fault, and their egos wouldn't allow that. He gave a slow, deliberate nod, as if accepting a reality he had hoped to avoid. He stepped back from the podium, pulling out his phone. It was a sleek, unassuming device, with no visible branding. He didn't raise it to record. He simply unlocked it with his thumb and navigated to his contacts. "What are you doing?" Selena asked suspiciously. "I'm making a call," Damian said, his eyes still on his screen. "Since your internal systems for verification are inadequate, I'm going to have to use my own." He pressed a single contact labeled Gideon. He put the phone to his ear. Andrew and Selena exchanged a look of smug disbelief. Who was he going to call his lawyer? His mother? To them it was an empty gesture, a desperate act by a man who had been caught and was now trying to save face. They couldn't have been more wrong. They thought they were building a wall of corporate indifference. They didn't realize they were standing on a trap door, and Damian Cole's finger was now hovering over the release button. The scene at Gate C33 had curdled into a tense public theatre. The boarding process had completely stopped. Passengers in the priority line craned their necks, while those seated in the waiting area watched with undisguised curiosity. The digital age had conditioned everyone to recognize the anatomy of a viral moment, and this had all the hallmarks. The young woman Sarah was still filming her hand, now steadier, as she rested her arm on her carry-on. A businessman behind her, clearly agitated about the delay, grumbled loudly. "For crying out loud, if his ID is fake, call the cops. If it's not, let him on the plane, we have a schedule to keep." His comment, intended to speed things up, only added fuel to the fire. Selene shot him a venomous look. "We are following procedure, sir." Damian, meanwhile, was on his phone, his back turned slightly to the gate agents, affording himself a sliver of privacy. His voice was too low for anyone to overhear the exact words, but the cadence was unmistakable, calm, efficient, delivering information. "Gideon," he said softly, "apologies for this. We have a situation at Hartsfield-Jackson. Gate C33, ascend air. Yes, commercial. There's an impasse regarding my identification. The local staff are unable to resolve it." He paused, listening. "Correct. They've refused secondary verification. They are citing company policy." Another pause. "Understood. No need for that. Just expedite my transit. The meeting is in 4 hours." He listened one last time, then said, "Thank you," and ended the call. The entire conversation took no more than 45 seconds. He turned back to face Selena and Andrew, his phone now back in his pocket. His expression was unchanged. He simply stood and waited. This silent, confident waiting was for Andrew Finch the most infuriating part of the entire encounter. It was the posture of a man who knew something he didn't. It felt like a mockery of his managerial authority. "Look, Mr. Cole," Andrew said, trying to seize control of the narrative. "Making a phone call isn't going to change the facts. We've made our decision. I can have airport security escort you back to the main terminal if you'd like to continue this discussion away from the gate." It was a threat thinly veiled as an offer. "That won't be necessary," Damian replied. "But I do appreciate you keeping the jet bridge clear." This cryptic comment left Andrew speechless. Before he could formulate a response, the pilot of Flight 815, a veteran captain named Frank Morrison, emerged from the jet bridge. He was a man with a weathered face and an air of no-nonsense authority that dwarfed Andrew's. "Andrew, what in God's name is the hold-up?" Captain Morrison boomed. "We're going to miss our departure window. The tower is already getting antsy." Andrew's demeanor shifted instantly. He was subservient to the flight crew. "Captain, apologies. We have a minor security issue. This passenger's ID is questionable. We're just being cautious." The captain glanced at the passport on the counter, then at Damian. He saw a well-dressed man standing calmly. He saw a new-issue passport he'd seen dozens of times from his crew. He looked at Selene's flushed face and Andrew's nervous stance. With 30 years of experience reading people and situations, he could smell administrative nonsense a mile away. "Questionable how?" the captain asked, his eyes narrowing on Andrew. "Did you run it? Does he match the picture?" "Well, yes, but the feel of it," Selene started. "The feel of it," Captain Morrison interrupted, incredulous. "We don't delay a flight for feelings. Either it's a valid security threat, in which case you call the Port Authority police, or it's not, in which case you board the passenger. Which is it, Andrew? Put on the spot. Andrew flinched. He hadn't wanted to involve law enforcement, because he knew deep down that the IDs were likely real. An official check would expose their decision as baseless, making them look incompetent. But refusing to do so made them look obstructionist. He was trapped by his own bad decision. We felt it was best to handle it at the airline level first. Captain, Andrew stammered. As this debate was happening, a new sound began to cut through the airport's din. It was a distant but distinct siren. It was unusual to hear sirens so clearly inside the terminal, especially on the secure side of the airport. At the same time, down on the tarmac below the gate's large windows, a scene of shocking abnormality was unfolding. Two gleaming black Chevrolet Suburbans, the kind used by federal agencies and diplomatic services, were driving across the active tarmac, lights flashing. They were not airport vehicles. They moved with an authority that scattered baggage carts and ground crew like startled birds. They were being led by an airport operations SUV, which itself seemed to be scrambling to keep up. The passengers seated near the window began to murmur and point. Sarah, the student, pivoted her phone, zooming in on the incredible sight. An unscheduled high-security motorcade on the tarmac at Hartsfield-Jackson was unheard of. The Suburbans didn't head for the private aviation terminal. They drove directly toward Gate C-33. They pulled up on the asphalt directly beneath the jet bridge of Ascend Air Flight 815. Inside the terminal, everyone was now looking out the window. Captain Morrison squinted his eyes, widening in disbelief. "What the hell is that?" he muttered. The doors of the lead Suburban opened. 4 men emerged. They were dressed not in police uniforms, but in sharp, dark, well-fitted suits with earpieces. They moved with the fluid, synchronized economy of motion that spoke of intense training. One of them opened the rear passenger door. A 5th man, older and with an air of command, stepped out. This was Gideon. Up at the gate, Celine and Andrew were oblivious, still caught in their standoff with the pilot. But Damian Cole saw it all. He gave a subtle, almost imperceptible nod, visible only to himself. His verification system had arrived, and it had come with a police escort. The surreal spectacle on the tarmac sent a ripple of confusion and awe through the terminal. Air travel is a world of rigid protocols, and what was happening outside the windows of Gate C-33 was a flagrant, stunning violation of every single one of them. Private vehicles, especially non-airport ones, do not simply drive up to a commercial aircraft during active boarding. It was the aviation equivalent of a chariot pulling up to the main altar during Sunday Mass. The ground crew who had been loading the last of the baggage froze, staring at the black SUVs. A refueler disconnected his hose, his jaw slack. Through the cockpit window, Captain Morrison's first officer was speaking animatedly into his radio, no doubt demanding to know who had authorized this unprecedented breach of sterile area security. The men in suits who emerged from the Suburbans were the picture of quiet professionalism. They scanned the area, their gazes sweeping over the aircraft, the jet bridge and the terminal windows. Their leader, Gideon Hayes, was a man in his 50s, with silvering hair and eyes that seemed to miss nothing. He wore a tailored suit that couldn't quite conceal the athletic build beneath it. He spoke briefly into his wrist, a motion so subtle it was almost missed. Up at the gate, the sound of an approaching commotion finally broke through the bubble of Andrew and Selena's self-made drama. A Port Authority police officer, a grim-faced sergeant, came striding down the concourse at a pace just short of a run. He was followed by 2 more officers and a frantic-looking airport operations manager in a high-visibility vest. They weren't heading for Damian. They were heading for the gate podium. "Ascend Air Gate, C-33. The police sergeant barked his eyes, scanning the name tags of Andrew and Celine. "Yes, Sergeant, I'm Andrew Finch, the manager on duty," Andrew said, puffing out his chest, mistakenly believing this official presence was a vindication of his actions. "We've had to detain a passenger due to—" "I don't care about your passenger." The sergeant cut him off, his voice like gravel. "I care about the 2 unauthorized vehicles currently sitting on my tarmac. My dispatch is lighting up with calls from the control tower saying you have a security situation at this gate that required a tarmac-level intercept." "What is going on?" Andrew's face went blank. "Tarmac-level intercept, I didn't call for that." The airport operations manager, a woman named Maria, stepped forward, her face flushed with anger and stress. "The call didn't come from you. It came from the FAA's regional command, who got it from the Department of Homeland Security, who told us to give an inbound security detail immediate and unrestricted access to this gate. Now I have pilots screaming on the radio, and you're telling me you don't know anything about it." Celine and Andrew stared, mouths agape. The scale of the situation had suddenly expanded exponentially beyond their control. This was no longer about a questionable ID. As if on cue, Gideon Hayes and one of his men appeared at the end of the jet bridge, having been let through a secure access door at the bottom. They walked toward the gate with an unhurried, commanding stride that made the bustling airport concourse feel like their private hallway. The crowd instinctively parted for them. Gideon's eyes swept past the police, past the fuming operations manager, and past the stunned airline employees. They landed directly on Damian Cole. A subtle look of recognition and relief passed between them. Gideon approached the podium, his presence immediately sucking all the air out of Andrew Finch's manufactured authority. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. "Andrew Finch, Selina Miller." He asked, his voice calm and dangerously low. His gaze flicked down to their name tags, confirming their identities. "Yes," Celine stammered. Gideon nodded slowly. "I'm Gideon Hayes. I'm the Director of Global Security for Orion Capital." He paused, letting the name hang in the air. It meant nothing to them, but the title itself carried immense weight. "I was informed by Mr. Cole that you were having some difficulty with his travel documents and were holding him here against his will." The phrase, "holding him here against his will," was chosen with surgical precision. It transformed a customer service dispute into a potential claim of unlawful detainment. Andrew found his voice, though it was now reedy and uncertain. "Now see here, we weren't holding him. We are an airline. He is a passenger. We have the right—" Gideon raised a single hand, and Andrew's words died in his throat. "The right you have is to conduct your business within the confines of the law. Your difficulty with Mr. Cole's federally issued identification has triggered a security protocol you can't possibly comprehend. A protocol that is now costing my firm, the airport, and the federal government significant resources to resolve." He turned to Damian. "Sir, are you all right?" "I'm fine, Gideon," Damian said, his voice holding a note of tired resignation. "Just delayed. We'll correct that immediately," Gideon replied. He then turned back to the police sergeant. "Sergeant, my team has it from here. We'll be escorting Mr. Cole." The sergeant, who clearly recognized a higher authority when he saw one, simply nodded. "Understood." Gideon's gaze then fell upon Celine and Andrew, and for the first time it held a sliver of ice. "As for you two," he said, his voice dropping even further, "you have not just inconvenienced a passenger, you have interfered with the travel of a Tier 1 principal. The consequences for that are significant." Celine and Andrew could only stare, their minds reeling. Tier 1 Principal, Orion Capital Tarmac Intercept. It was a vocabulary from a world of power and consequence they never knew existed. They had picked a fight with a man they assumed was powerless, and in response, an entire apparatus of overwhelming force had descended upon them. They thought they were gatekeepers. They were about to find out they were just pebbles in the path of a tidal wave. The terminal at gate C33 was now silent, save for the frantic whispers of passengers and the clicking of Sarah's phone as she continued to record the entire unbelievable scene. All eyes were on the small group at the podium, where the balance of power had shifted so completely it was almost a physical force. Gideon Hayes was the new center of gravity. His authority was not derived from a corporate blazer or a laminated name tag. It was intrinsic, projected by his calm demeanor and the implicit threat of the forces he represented. "Mr. Cole's passport and license, please," Gideon said to Selena, his tone not a request, but a command. Numbly, Celine pushed the 2 pieces of plastic across the counter. Gideon's associate, a younger man with the watchful eyes of a hawk, picked them up using gloved hands, placed them in a clear evidence bag, and sealed it. The gesture was clinical, deliberate, and deeply ominous. It was how one handled evidence at a crime scene. That's his property," Andrew Finch managed to protest weakly. "It is now evidence of a potential civil rights violation and corporate malfeasance," Gideon stated flatly without looking at him. "It will be returned to Mr. Cole after our legal team has made a full forensic copy." He then turned to the police sergeant. "Sergeant, I need the full names and employee identification numbers of Mr. Finch and Ms. Miller. I also need you to ensure they do not leave the airport. Ascend Air's corporate security and legal counsel will need to speak with them. So will ours." The sergeant nodded and pulled out a notepad. "Finch Miller, your IDs." Celine and Andrew fumbled for their airline credentials, their hands trembling. The reality of their situation was beginning to crash down on them. This wasn't about a written warning or a mark on their employee file. This was about legal teams and forensic copies. Captain Frank Morrison, who had been watching this all unfold with a stunned but growing sense of grim satisfaction, finally stepped forward. He addressed Gideon, directly pilot to professional. "Sir, I'm the captain of this flight. Is my passenger, Mr. Cole, going to be traveling with us, or not? I need to let the tower know if I've lost a passenger." Gideon turned to Damian, a silent question in his eyes. Damian looked at the Ascend Air logo on the jet bridge at the faces of Celine and Andrew, now pale with fear, and then back at the waiting aircraft. "No, Gideon," he said, his voice clear and resolute. "I have no intention of flying with this airline. Not today. Not ever again." He then looked at Captain Morrison. "Captain, my apologies for the delay you and your passengers have experienced. This was not my intention." The pilot just shook his head. "Don't you apologize for a thing, son." "Not a thing." He shot one last glare at Andrew and Celine that could have melted steel, and then retreated back into the jet bridge to prepare his flight for departure, now 1 passenger lighter. "We have transportation ready for you on the tarmac, sir," Gideon said to Damian. "We can have you at Fulton County Executive for a private charter within 20 minutes. We'll still make your meeting in San Francisco." "Thank you, Gideon," Damian said. He picked up his leather portfolio from the floor where he'd set it down. As they prepared to leave, the final devastating piece of the puzzle fell into place. The airport operations manager, Maria, who had been furiously typing on her tablet, trying to figure out who Damian Cole and Orion Capital were, suddenly gasped. Her eyes went wide. She looked up from her tablet at Andrew Finch, her expression a mixture of horror and disbelief. "Andrew, do you know who he is?" she whispered, her voice trembling. Before Andrew could answer, Gideon looked at Damian and spoke in a clear, formal tone, loud enough for everyone at the gate to hear. "Mr. Cole, your Chief of Staff, has been notified of the delay. The board of Global Wings Holdings is also being briefed on the situation as we speak." The name Global Wings Holdings struck Andrew Finch like a physical blow. He staggered back a step, his face turning a ghastly shade of white. Global Wings Holdings was the multi-billion-dollar parent corporation that owned Ascend Air. It was the ultimate authority, the top of their entire corporate food chain. And Celine Miller, who had been following the news about her company's precarious financial position, finally made the connection. She remembered the headlines from the Wall Street Journal and Bloomberg, a hostile takeover bid, a massive acquisition, a legendary press-shy financier known for buying up distressed corporations and restructuring them from the top down, a man named Damian Cole, the head of Orion Capital, their new boss, the man they had just accused of using a fake ID, humiliated in front of a crowd, and refused to allow onto one of his own planes, was the very person on the verge of acquiring the entire company. Celine's knees felt weak. A wave of nausea washed over her. She looked at Damian Cole, truly seeing him for the first time. Not as a potential problem or a suspicious figure, but as the architect of her future, a future she had just incinerated with her own arrogance. Damian gave her one last, lingering look. There was no anger in his eyes. There was no triumph. There was only a profound, quiet sadness. Then he turned and, flanked by his security team, walked down the jet bridge, not to the plane, but to a staircase leading down to the waiting SUVs on the tarmac, and a world of power she could never have imagined. The departure of Damian Cole from Gate C33 was not the end of the story. It was merely the end of the prologue. What followed was a swift and brutal cascade of consequences, a corporate karma event that unfolded with breathtaking speed. Before Gideon's Suburban had even cleared Hartsfield-Jackson's airspace, the video Sarah had been recording was uploaded. With the caption, "Ascend Air Agent has meltdown accuses black passenger of having fake ID. You won't believe who he is." Ascend Air. Flying while black. Atlanta. The clip hit TikTok and Twitter like a lightning strike. The video was a perfect storm of outrage. It clearly showed Celine's condescending dismissal, Andrew's smarmy defense of policy, and Damian's incredible stoic calm. The dramatic finale, the arrival of the black SUVs, and the dawning horror on the employees' faces as they realized their monumental blunder, was cinematic gold. Within an hour, it had 1 million views. By noon, it was at 20 million, and was the #1 trending topic worldwide. News outlets smelling blood in the water pounced. Journalists quickly connected the dots. Damian Cole, the reclusive head of the notoriously aggressive private equity firm Orion Capital, was in the final stages of a $6.7 billion acquisition of Global Wings Holdings. The deal was still pending final shareholder approval, but Orion had already secured a majority stake. For all intents and purposes, Damian Cole already owned Ascend Air. The story was irresistible. Airline humiliates its new billionaire owner. The financial markets reacted instantly. The stock of Global Wings Holdings ticker GWH, already volatile due to the takeover news, plummeted. In pre-market trading, it dropped 12%. By the time the opening bell rang on Wall Street, it had plunged a catastrophic 28%. The incident at Gate C33 had vaporized nearly $2 billion of the company's value in less than 3 hours. The reason was simple. If the frontline staff of a company were this dysfunctional, what other rot lay hidden within the corporate structure that Orion Capital was about to inherit? It signaled a deep systemic cultural problem. At Ascend Air's corporate headquarters in Dallas, it was pure chaos. The CEO, a man named Richard Branson-esque, named Harrison Croft, was in a board meeting when his phone began vibrating so violently it nearly fell off the table. He saw dozens of missed calls from his head of communications, his legal counsel, and the chairman of Global Wings Holdings. He was shown the video. He watched his face draining of all color. He saw his company's carefully curated brand of premium inclusive service being torched live on the internet by 2 of his own employees. "Get me Finch and Miller." Harrison Croft roared, his voice echoing through the boardroom. "Pull them off the floor. Confiscate their badges. I want them in a room with legal in 1 hour. And get a statement ready. A full-throated, on our knees, begging for forgiveness apology. No excuses. No, we are investigating. We are guilty as sin, and the world knows it." Meanwhile, back in Atlanta, Celine and Andrew were escorted by a grim-faced airport police officer to a windowless administrative office deep in the bowels of the airport. Their company-issued phones had been taken. They sat in silence, the magnitude of their error sinking in like a block of ice in their stomachs. Andrew was sweating profusely, dabbing at his forehead with a handkerchief. Celine stared at the wall, her mind replaying the encounter over and over. Every decision she made, every word she uttered, had been the wrong one. Her gut feeling, her pride, her refusal to simply listen, it had all led to this. This sterile room, this deafening silence, this bottomless pit of dread. An hour later, 2 lawyers from Ascend Air's corporate office arrived. They weren't there to defend Celine and Andrew. They were there for damage control. The questions were blunt and merciless. "Ms. Miller, what was the specific, articulable security threat you identified?" It felt off. A feeling is not a security threat. "Did you observe any signs of tampering with the documents?" "No, but..." "Mr. Finch, why did you not escalate the verification to a supervisor or a TSA document specialist as per protocol for non-standard identification issues?" "I trusted my employee's judgment." "You trusted her feeling." The lawyer shot back, his voice dripping with contempt. "You trusted a feeling, and it's now cost our shareholders over $1 billion. You didn't follow protocol. You escalated a customer service issue into a public humiliation, and you did it to the one man on this planet you should have been carrying on a velvet pillow to his seat." The meeting was short. By the end of it, both Celine Miller and Andrew Finch had been summarily fired, their careers with Ascend Air terminated for gross negligence and failure to adhere to established security and customer service protocols, resulting in catastrophic brand and financial damages. But it was too late. The karma cascade was in full flood. Other stories of similar treatment on Ascend Air flights began to surface online, shared by thousands in solidarity with Damian Cole. A pattern of systemic bias was emerging. The problem wasn't just Celine and Andrew. The problem was the culture that created them. And Damian Cole, the man who now owned that culture, was about to begin the most aggressive corporate restructuring of his career. The departure of Damian Cole from Gate C-33 was not an end, but a detonation. The shockwave radiated outwards, and Ground Zero was the gleaming corporate headquarters of Ascend Air in Dallas. The atmosphere inside the executive suite, usually a hum of confident ambition, had become a frantic hive of pure panic. CEO Harrison Croft, a man whose public persona was built on charismatic control, had lost all composure. He paced his cavernous office, the viral video playing on a loop on a massive screen. Each replay, another turn of the knife. He saw 12 years of meticulous brand-building commercials featuring smiling, diverse families, glossy magazine ads, promising a new echelon of respect in the skies, incinerated by a 4-minute clip. The stock ticker on a corner of the screen was a river of blood red, showing billions in shareholder value vanishing into the digital ether. The board of Global Wings Holdings had been on a conference call with him for an hour, their voices a chorus of controlled fury. They weren't asking for explanations. They were demanding a sacrifice. "I don't want their side of the story," Croft had bellowed at his chief legal officer. "Their side of the story is currently trading at a 28% loss. Their gut feeling has triggered covenant breaches on our corporate debt. Get them off the floor, get their badges, get them into a room, and read them their corporate rights. They are done. Their pensions are done. Their careers are done." The next morning, Harrison Croft stood before a hastily assembled press conference. The room was a cacophony of flashing cameras and shouted questions. He looked like a man who hadn't slept, his expensive suit hanging on him like a shroud. This was not the confident industry titan. This was a man walking the corporate gallows. His apology was not just an act of contrition. It was an act of desperate survival. Yesterday at Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport, 2 of our employees failed. But let me be unequivocally clear, their failure is my failure. Our company failed. Croft began, his voice hoarse, abandoning the teleprompter to stare directly into the cameras. We failed a man, Mr. Damian Cole, who deserved nothing but our utmost respect. We failed our customers who place their trust in us every single day. And we failed to live up to the most basic principles of dignity and human decency. There are no excuses for the prejudice and incompetence displayed at that gate. There is no policy, no procedure, no training manual that can justify the humiliation that was inflicted. He detailed the immediate termination of Selene Miller and Andrew Finch, but he knew it was a hollow gesture. "This is not enough," he continued, his voice cracking slightly. "Firing 2 employees is a headline, not a solution. What this incident has so painfully exposed is not an isolated error, but a symptom of a deeper cultural illness within our organization, an illness that I, as CEO, allowed to fester in the shadows. And for that, I am profoundly, deeply, and personally sorry." For 2 days, this was the only narrative. The world watched Croft's public flagellation and waited. The media was in a feeding frenzy. Financial news networks debated the future of the Orion Capital acquisition. Pundits on cable news argued the social implications. "Will Damian Cole, the corporate raider, bring the hammer down?" asked a host on Bloomberg. "This is a textbook case of why representation in the boardroom matters," declared a commentator on another network. The silence from Damian Cole himself was deafening. It created a vacuum that was filled with speculation and fear. The entire business world held its breath, expecting a lawsuit of unprecedented scale or a brutal, hostile cleansing of the company he was set to acquire. Then on the 3rd day, the statement appeared. It wasn't delivered in a press conference or a television interview. It was a simple letter published on the Orion Capital website under the title, "A Moment of Clarity." The tone was not vengeful or angry. It was calm, analytical, and utterly revolutionary. The events that took place at Gate C-33 were unfortunate, but they were not unique. The letter began. To focus solely on my experience would be to miss the point entirely. What happened to me is a daily reality for millions of people who are judged not by their character, but by the color of their skin, their attire, or the assumptions of people in positions of minor authority. The only difference is that my situation, due to a confluence of unrelated business circumstances, became public. The true issue, therefore, is not the humiliation I experienced. It is the countless unseen, unrecorded moments of prejudice that happen every day in airports, in stores, and in workplaces, eroding the fabric of our society. He announced he would not be pursuing personal litigation. A lawsuit would quantify this incident in terms of dollars, he wrote. But the damage done is not monetary. It is systemic. To sue would be a distraction from the real work that needs to be done. My goal is not personal enrichment. It is fundamental reform. This was the pivot. He wasn't a victim. He was a diagnostician, and he was about to prescribe the cure. He confirmed the acquisition of Global Wings Holdings would proceed, but his first order of business would be the creation of the Dignity in Transit Initiative. He was personally seeding a $100 million fund to establish a new standard for the entire travel industry. A consortium of leading sociologists from universities like Harvard and Stanford civil rights attorneys, from the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, and behavioral psychologists specializing in implicit bias would be hired to design a new mandatory training curriculum for every employee from the tarmac crew to the C-suite. This wouldn't be a one-off seminar with stale coffee and PowerPoint slides. It would be a continuous evolving program with rigorous simulation-based training, where employees would be put in complex scenarios to challenge their biases in a controlled environment. Crucially, executive and employee bonuses would now be inextricably tied to metrics of inclusion and dignitary service measured by independent auditors and direct customer feedback. Furthermore, he addressed the technological failure. Human bias is a flaw we must work to mitigate, but technological inadequacy is a problem we can solve outright, he wrote. He ordered a complete ground-up overhaul of all customer verification systems. A new centralized system, powered by machine learning and linked directly to global federal databases in real time, would be developed. This system would remove the burden of subjective judgment from frontline employees. An ID would be scanned, and a simple green light for valid or a red light for a flag would appear. Any red light situation would be automatically and discreetly escalated to a small elite team of highly trained remote verification specialists who would resolve the issue with the passenger in minutes. The gut feeling of a stressed gate agent would be rendered obsolete. For Celine Miller and Andrew Finch, the reckoning was quiet and absolute. They were not only fired, but found themselves unemployable in the industry they had dedicated their lives to. They were digitally infamous, their faces the unwilling icons of corporate failure. Andrew, a man who had built his identity on his managerial title, found himself selling extended car warranties over the phone, the forced enthusiasm in his voice a hollow echo of his former self-importance. Celine moved back to her parents' house in a small town in rural Georgia, deleting her social media and cutting ties with her former life. She was haunted, not by the loss of her job, but by the dawning, sickening realization that Damian Cole was right. Her decision hadn't been a security precaution. It had been a prejudice, a toxic impulse she never knew she had, until it was reflected back at her on every news channel in the world. In the end, Damian Cole's actions redefined the concept of corporate karma. It wasn't simply about punishment, it was about responsibility. He recognized that he had been handed a rare and powerful opportunity to take a moment of personal degradation and use it as leverage to force an entire corporate behemoth to become better, more humane, and more just. He didn't just fire the gatekeepers who had wronged him, he rebuilt the gate. The shockwaves of the Dignity in Transit initiative spread with other airlines, nervously announcing reviews of their own policies, knowing that a new higher standard had been set. The story of Flight 815 became a legend in business schools, a case study not in revenge, but in the awesome transformative power of turning a moment of humiliation into a legacy of honor. This story serves as a powerful reminder that what we see on the surface is often just a fraction of the truth. It wasn't just about a Karen at an airport gate. It was a collision of unconscious bias and hidden power that exposed deep cracks in a corporate culture. Damian Cole's story is a testament to the fact that true strength isn't about raising your voice, but about knowing the weight of your influence and using it to enact meaningful change turning a personal insult into a public lesson for an entire industry. It's a real-life lesson in karma, where the consequences weren't just punitive, they were transformative. If this story resonated with you, and you believe in the power of accountability and quiet strength, please help this narrative reach more people. Hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs to hear it, and be sure to subscribe to the channel for more unforgettable stories, where justice, karma, and the hidden truths of our world are brought to light. Thank you for listening.